welcome. I'm Marilynn Preston, and today we're going to hear the fascinating personal story of Leonid Feldman. Back in the 70s, Leonid Feldman was a good Soviet citizen with barely any Jewish identity at all. He was a party activist in a country where God is dead and anti-Semitism lives. And Mr. Feldman was a student in scientific atheism. Well, today Leonid Feldman is a free man and a passionate Jew, a concerned Jew. Indeed, he is the first Soviet citizen to become ordained a conservative rabbi in the United States. So welcome, Rabbi Feldman. For us to understand how far you've come geographically and spiritually, we need to hear a little bit about your background, about growing up in Russia. What can you tell us?
Well, I grew up in a city called Kishinev. In fact, this is where I spent most of my life. And as you said, I was a typical Soviet child. I believed what my teachers told me. I found out that I was a Jew, not from my parents. A neighbor, a boy, at the age of 7, called me Zhid, which is dirty kike. And I didn't understand that word. I came over to the boy saying, "What is it? What do you call me?" He said, "Go home and find out. Your parents will tell you." I went home and I asked my father. I said, "I was called Zhid. What does it mean, father?" And my father said, who told you that? I said, "Vovka." He said, "Don't play with this boy. It's a bad boy." So that was my beginning of my Jewish identity, if you can call it. But I think a very powerful thing happened to me a year later when the first human being was sent into space. His name was Yuri Gagarin. I suspect most of your viewers, even if they remember the name, they don't really care much about him. He was the hero of my childhood. I studied everything about him. We took classes in him. I wrote essays. I used to know at the age of 8 what kind of cereal Gagarin liked for breakfast. I wanted to be like him. When Gagarin returned to Earth, there was a huge press conference in the Kremlin, and we were watching on our little TV screen. It was very important to us what that man had to say. And at that press conference, one of the correspondents said, "Comrade Gagarin, you're the only one who has been up there. Tell us the truth. Did you see him? Did you find God?" And I will never forget the smiling face of my hero who said, "Nope, I was looking for him all over the place. He's not there. There is no God." So I think that was the major impact, if I can call it, on my religious identity. So for the rest of my childhood and youth, in fact, until very recently, I was a passionate atheist. I was sure there is no God. There cannot be a God.
Indeed, in the Soviet Union, Jews had a negative status. How did that affect you?
I think that basically the Soviets accomplished what they wanted to accomplish with Jews. I was a self-hating Jew. I was an anti-Semite. With the first name of Leonid, it's very easy, basically, to make friends with non-Jewish children. So for many years, I avoided being friends with Jewish children. I would walk into a room, I would see 3 Jews in the corner, and I would make sure that I was never seen in that corner. Because my last name was Feldman, I was like them, and yet I went out of my way to prove that I'm not like them. And for many years, throughout my childhood, people were shocked when they found out that I was Feldman. And the typical reaction was a typical anti-Semitic reaction all over the world. People would say, "Really, you're Feldman? You don't look like one of those. But you know what? Even though you're Jewish, you're a nice guy." And I loved it. That was the goal of my life. And until the age of 21, I think I was a typical anti-Semite. I hated myself, I hated my last name, I hated Jews.
And what happened at 21?
At the age of 21, I was given secretly a book by one of the active refuseniks in Kishinev, and he took the risk. It was very dangerous for him to trust me and to give me a book to read. That if either of us were caught, we would have ended up being another Sharansky. You know, for reading a Jewish book, you can get 15 years in Siberia in Russia, at least in those times. That book changed my life. It's a famous book. It's called Exodus by Leonid. That book opened my eyes. It was a Russian translation, very tiny copy. He gave me a heavy briefcase outside of the park, and he said, "You take a taxi, you go home, you read the book. At 7 o'clock in the morning, whether you finish it or not, you take another taxi and you bring this briefcase right here." He was taking a major risk. I was taking a major risk. The funniest thing is that while taking that taxi, I did not know the title of the book. In fact, I didn't know what the book was all about. I knew one thing: if I am caught, my family will never see me again. But I was lucky. That taxi didn't get stopped. I came home and I read that book. and it opened my eyes. I was 21, I was a physics teacher. I could explain to a normal Soviet teenager the basic principles of Einstein's theory of relativity. And yet at the same age of 21, I did not know the word synagogue. I didn't know that there was a profession called Rabbi. I never heard about the 10 Commandments. The most shocking thing I found out that night was the word Holocaust. My country, my government did not tell me that Hitler disliked Jews. I thought Hitler hated Russians. When I finished that book, I said, I don't belong here. I must get out. And that was the beginning of my very painful and difficult process of trying to get out of that country.
Did you have an immediate reaction to this, or was it a profound moment, or did it take some time?
I think around that time it became very clear to me that there is no future for me here. I simply asked myself, I think that's what I asked myself. I said, do I have the right, the moral right, to stay in this country and to get married and to raise a child? What am I going to teach my child? I did not want my child to grow up the way I did, hating himself, hating his people, hating his last name, and so on. So at that point, I realized there is another country, a country for myself, for people like me. Everybody is a Feldman there. Nobody will ever tell me in that country, even though you're a Feldman, you're okay. So that's how I was turned on to Zionism, which does not mean I became a religious Jew. In fact, I became a religious Jew much later, but I became a passionate Zionist. I said, this is not the place for the Jews. We don't belong here. We must get out.
Once you expressed that, what penalty did you pay in Russia?
Oh, this deserves a whole different show. It's very difficult for me to explain to Americans what it means. Very often people ask me, oh, you were a refusenik. How long did it take you to get out? I say, well, approximately 3 years. And people say, oh, you were lucky. Americans have no idea what they're talking about. Even if you're a refusenik for 3 months, this is probably the most painful thing any American can even imagine. You lose everything. You lose your apartment, you lose your job, you lose your parents, you lose your friends. My sister was not able to speak on the phone with me for 3 years. The day I became a refusenik, she was told by her in-laws with whom she lived at that time, with her husband, they said, we feel very sorry for Leonid, but you realize from now on he may not call this number, he should forget this number, and he can never visit us again. So for 3 years, I walked around my own streets, the streets of my city, of my motherland. I felt like I had a contagious disease. It's very difficult to explain to Americans what happens the day you become a refusenik, because it becomes dangerous for everybody else to be in contact with you, because you are followed constantly by the KGB. It's very strange for me. After my lectures around the country, there is always somebody who comes over to me and says, Rabbi Feldman, you know, I was in Leningrad 2 years ago. You know, they followed us. And these people think that they're going to surprise me. They're going to tell me something exciting. They followed us. Or we were bugged. Our room was bugged. Well, it was everyday life for me for 3 years. My rooms were not only bugged. I was running away. I was running away from the KGB on one hand. I was running away from the police on the other hand, because the police were after me. They wanted to send me to Siberia for being a parasite. See, you lose your job automatically. On the other hand, according to Soviet law, it's illegal not to work. When I came to America, I was shocked. I heard this feminism, you know, women demand to work. I never understood this. In the Soviet Union, if a woman does not work for 60 days, she goes to Siberia. Everybody works. You have to work. Anyway, so it's very complicated. Basically, you become an outsider in that society. And you're in limbo. On one hand, they say you're nothing. On the other hand, they say you belong here. You will never leave. So that's what a refusenik is all about.
During this time, you were in jail at some point?
At some point, at the very end, I went on a hunger strike. I was very desperate, and at the suggestion of Anatoly Sharansky, I went on a hunger strike, which, in my case, was very successful. I was arrested for a very short time. I spent 1 month in jail, and a month later, they kicked me out. They said, get out of this country. We'll give you 10 days to get out of here. And 8 days later, I was walking the streets of Tel Aviv.
Where were you when you went on the hunger strike?
I was at the city council. This is basically the center of government in my city, in Kishinev, and I was by myself. I announced my hunger strike to make sure you don't just sit in the room and stop eating. Obviously, it had to be prepared through Sharansky and Vladimir Slepak and other refuseniks. And it was the message was sent to the West. So the night I was arrested, it was announced on BBC, Voice of America, Radio Liberty, and so on. And I also mailed a telegram to the Secretary General of the United Nations. I mailed a telegram to Brezhnev, made a telegram to Jimmy Carter. So you try to do as much publicity as possible.
And it worked.
In my case, it worked. I believe, I strongly believe it worked because there was enough publicity going on in the West. People like yourself were interviewing refugees here in Chicago. People like your community were marching in the streets screaming freedom to Feldman. And maybe the KGB at some point said, you know what, it's not worth it for us to upset the Americans. Let him out. That's basically what happens. This is the only reason a Jew gets out. The only reason a Jew gets out of the Soviet Union is that there is enough publicity in the West, enough pressure. It's just not worth it for the Soviets to just ruin the image and stuff like this.
Well, particularly now when they're really working so hard on their image. So from there, from Russia, you went not to America, but to Israel.
That's right. I spent 3 years in Jerusalem. I was studying at the Hebrew University. I was teaching. I was traveling. I was trying to learn 2 languages at the same time. My English was basically 0. My Hebrew was definitely 0. I knew 1 word. I knew shalom. And 3 years later, I was sent by the Israeli government to Italy to work with Russian emigres who just got out of the Soviet Union. This was 1979, which was the best year in immigration history ever. This was the year when we got 51,000 Jews out in 1 year. Now everybody's excited when we get 700 Jews a month. People get excited and gets on front pages. Isn't Gorbachev wonderful? Everybody forgot that in the times of terrible Brezhnev, 51,000 Jews got out.
Was that, do you think, because of Carter or because of Brezhnev?
I believe it was not because of Carter. I believe that Brezhnev wanted a lot from Carter. Brezhnev wanted SALT agreements. Brezhnev wanted Americans to lift the embargo on Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which is a very complicated issue. But basically speaking, again, as I said, there is no other reason why Soviet government lets Jews go. There is only one reason. When they feel that they're going to gain more from the West than by letting Jews out than the other way around. So at that time in 1979, this was the best year because Soviets had a lot to gain from Americans. And then for many reasons, including Afghanistan and so on, the gates were basically locked. Anyway, I came to Italy at the most exciting time, and I was in charge of all these emigres who decided to come to America, Canada, Australia.
And then you decided to come as well.
At the same time, while in Italy, I was already negotiating with Columbia University to get a PhD from Columbia in one particular field that was my field in Israel. I was working in a field called the education of gifted and talented children. So that was my field, and Columbia has the best department in that field. And so I was planning to come to America as a student. I came to America a year later after Italy, and I believe, fortunately, for me at least, looking back now, I couldn't afford Columbia University. So I ended up not going to Columbia University. I ended up staying in America for some time. I decided, well, I might as well stay here. Maybe I'll save money. Maybe I'll go back to Columbia. And it was in America that I was turned on to the religious element of Judaism.
Now tell us about your spiritual transformation that led you to becoming a rabbi.
It's a very complex issue, obviously. It's not very easy to explain, but I'll try. It's very easy to be Jewish in Israel because you don't have to do much. Just because the stores are closed on Yom Kippur, you're Jewish. You speak Hebrew, you're Jewish. Hanukkah is felt in the streets, so it's very easy. I never even thought about this. That's it. You go to the army, you're a Jew. It was when I got out of Israel, when I left Israel, that I began to question myself. What does it mean to be Jewish, especially in Italy, when I had to be the teacher for all these thousands of Russian Jews? I had to explain to them what it means to be a Jew in the free world. And I was not sure. It's a very good question. Israelis have no idea what it means to be a Jew. If you ask a typical Israeli, he will say, well, I speak Ani medaber Ivrit, I pay taxes, I go to the army, I'm a Jew. Well, maybe it was good for Israel, but what do you do in Italy? What do you do in America? So I began to think a lot. And
were you going to temple at the time? Were you observant?
No, I was totally unobservant. And at that time, I was very fortunate. I was simply introduced to two very talented, brilliant Jewish teachers. I think probably the most brilliant teachers in America. And their names are pretty well known. Joseph Telushkin and Dennis Prager. They became my closest friends. They gave me a book to read that they wrote many years ago called The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism. And again, it makes sense. Once again, a book changed my life. The second turning point in my life was again because of a book. That book for the first time explained to me why to be a Jew. I believe the main problem with Jewish life in America is that our rabbis are not answering the most important question.
What is that?
Our rabbis and teachers keep screaming at Jews, trying to teach them how to be Jewish, how to observe Shabbat, how to light candles, how to have a Seder. But this is not the question that my generation, at least, is asking. This is not why 20-year-olds intermarry. They're not interested in how to be Jewish. The question that we have to answer first, before how, is why to be Jewish. In 1987, in America, when young people go to the same campuses and they fall in love with Catherine McKinsey, we have to come up with a question, with a real answer why they should not follow their feelings. They should not marry that Catherine for some other reasons. Why not? They're confused. And our parents don't explain to their children. They just say, well, you're a Jew, you marry a Jew. Well, that's not enough. I think this is a ridiculous reason. So if I'm Italian, I marry only an Italian? It makes no sense to me.
What was the reason that made sense to you?
Well, the reason, and that's what the book did actually to me, the reason is that Judaism is not just an ethnic group. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. We're not a cult. We're not a race. Anybody can join this club, black, yellow people, it doesn't matter. What really matters is that we are unique. We were chosen by the master of the universe 3,500 years ago, who chose a group of slaves, poor, hungry slaves who just got out of Egypt. He chose them and he said, you are going to be my partners in repairing this planet. You are going to help me to make sure that people treat each other nicely. If this is what every rabbi would scream from the pulpit, and if this is what every parent would say to their children, I believe that in the 60s, the Jewish kids would not run and scream, at America and burn American flag. If Jewish children would know that the main goal of Judaism is to make the world better, I believe Jewish kids would not join cults. They would not become Moonies. It makes no sense to me that a very high percentage of Hare Krishna are Jewish kids.
But in the 60s, young Jews were led by their feelings of social activism, of social justice.
The problem is that somehow, I'm amazed, but somehow we're still managing to get that feeling. We are different. Even the most assimilated Jew still feels a little bit more passionate about injustice than the rest of the society. The problem is they don't have to leave Judaism to do this. We Jews have been predominant in every ism in the world. If you look at feminism, who were the first feminists? You look at humanism, you look at any ism in the world, it's always the Jews. Communism, who were the best friends that Lenin had, and Marx and so on? Every movement in the world was always begun, every revolutionary movement was always begun by Jews who had some kind of feeling about justice and so on, but they didn't see it in Judaism. The problem is, it's all in Judaism. We have a system. We don't have to create another system. We have, I believe, the best system ever created by man or God to make a better world, and it's called Judaism. It has been longer than any other system. It has proven it works. We are a very tiny group of people, but we've been very, very successful. The entire planet today is very Jewish. The whole world is basically following the Torah. If you look at the world, there are 4 predominant movements on this planet. Christianity began by Jews. The followers were Jewish. The books were written in our language. All the ideas were taken from Judaism. Islam, based on the Torah, the followers, and so on. Communism and humanism. The 4 predominant social, political powers in the world today are very Jewish.
There's one other power that is affecting many Jews today. It's secularism. They are assimilating as quickly as they can.
I agree, and this is what I made the mission of my life. I believe that the problem is that we Jews in America, we still live in Middle Ages. We feel that our main enemy is Christianity. God forbid people will stand up and use the word Jesus Christ. I have no problems with that. I have no problems with Jerry Falwell. We Jews have much more in common with Jerry Falwell than with secularists. Most of them are Goldbergs and Schwartzes and so on. I believe that the power that is destroying America and the values that America is based on are not located in the South somewhere. It's located in Los Angeles, California. Jewish Hollywood is destroying American values.
It's very interesting. What do you mean by Jewish Hollywood?
Well, I don't think it's a secret to anybody that Hollywood is predominantly Jewish. Major producers and writers and movie makers have at least Jewish sounding names. The problem that I have with Hollywood and American media, generally speaking, New York Times for that matter, is that they are fighting the wrong enemy. Our enemy today, as Jews in America, as Jews and Americans, is not Jerry Falwell, it's not Pat Robertson, it is secularism, exactly what they are pushing. Because as Jews, we should be, especially in the 20th century, where the two major destructive forces in our history have been the most aggressively atheistic, anti-religious powers, Nazism and communism. More people, forget Jews, more human lives were lost to Nazism and communism, the two major anti-religious powers, than to any crusade, any pogrom in Christian Europe. And in the end of the 20th century, Jews are in the forefront of pushing secularism. We should be in the forefront of screaming Shema Israel, listen America, listen Jews, we need one God. We should learn better than anybody that when God is dead, then Auschwitz and Gulag must come back. That's what the 20th century has taught me, at least. I have no doubt, there is no doubt in my mind that when God is dead, then Auschwitz is the logical consequence. Because if God is dead, then who decides what's right and what's wrong? You may think that it's nice to help people, and if my name is Adolf Eichmann, I may choose to do for a living burning Jewish children. That's what he did for a living, basically. And in fact, when he was finally asked, why did you do this? He said, I don't understand what you're talking about. In my society, it was the best thing to do. I wanted to get to the top. And the best thing at that time to do was to kill Jews. So we should be in the forefront of screaming what we have been screaming for the last 3,500 years. Listen, the world, there is only one God, and He decides what's right and what's wrong.
Do you think perhaps that American Jews then are too comfortable to be paying much attention to their Judaism? Is that what you see as the problem?
Well, I'm not against capitalism, obviously. I don't have to present my anti-communist credentials, I hope. I love capitalism, I think it's wonderful, but I think you're right. I think we went too far. I was recently at a wedding, a Jewish wedding, where just the flower arrangements were I think, the bride and the groom spent $15,000 just for the flowers. I think this is disgusting, disgusting. I understand here in Chicago you have 18% of your Jewish population are Jews who live on or below the poverty level. And to have this kind of a situation where people throw away $15,000 for flowers, this is ridiculous. So it's not that we're too comfortable, although obviously it does make it very hard. It's very difficult when you're fed and comfortable to even appreciate what it feels like not to have the food and all the other luxuries. America is a very difficult country for passionate Judaism. I agree with you.
You know, Jews are not known for their proselytizing particularly. Clearly, you're interested in bringing Jews back and returning them to their Judaism. What do you find is the most effective way to do that?
Well, I have no problems with proselytizing, by the way, and historically we at some point in our history we stopped, but until that point we always did. There is no problem. I have no problem with standing on the corners and scream at people and tell them what we've got. If you've got the best market, if you've got the best product in the world, it's funny, we are very good in business. Jews can sell anything except for the product that we should be selling. We've got the best product in history of humanity, and we're doing the worst job in selling that product, in advertising that product. So I have no problems. I believe the only, and I'm not talking about really proselytizing. What I'm talking about is education. That's what I do. That's what I do for a living. I travel around America and I tell people some basic things about Judaism. Unfortunately, they're shocked. They never heard this.
What shocks them?
That the goal of being Jewish, for instance, is changing the world. Actually actively getting out there and changing the world. They think the goal of Judaism, isn't it nice to have Hanukkah and to have
Lox and
bagels and Seder, and they feel very Jewish about this.
As you travel around, do you see that Americans have a lot of misconceptions about Russia, and particularly about this era of glasnost? Do you have more fear that we are being led to something we don't understand?
Well, generally speaking, Americans know very little about the Soviet society. The fact that you call it Russia is also ridiculous. Russia, I never heard that word. My father never heard that word. A country called Russia disappeared 70 years ago. I never heard that word. It's like calling you an Indian. So it tells something about American education. Americans know very little about the Soviet Union. But especially now, because of glasnost, because, again, our media are so, their values are, I think, are very wrong values. They're so impressed by the wonderful, sophisticated PR that was put together by Gorbachev. The fact that in the beginning when he appeared, this Gorbachev, all I read in New York Times was, look at his wife. She's pretty. She's wearing these beautiful dresses. Oh, therefore, we have a better chance for world peace. I never understood that logic. Perhaps you can explain that to me.
Well, there are some encouraging signs. There's an arms agreement, perhaps. Seems to be a summit meeting coming now. Do you believe that these are just cosmetic changes, more PR, or do you think something is basically fundamentally changing in the Soviet Union?
There are some artificial changes. Everybody admits it. We just spoke with Sharansky about this 3 days ago. There are some changes going on inside of the Soviet Union, but they're not basic changes. That society cannot change basically. Gorbachev is interested in agreements with America because that country is falling apart. Therefore, he is going to improve economy by signing a lot of pacts with America. However, this is still a totalitarian police regime that has no respect for human dignity and human rights. And therefore, we have to scream even stronger than ever before.
You certainly are an effective spokesperson for these basic human rights, human dignity. We really appreciate you being here today, Leonid Feldman, Rabbi Feldman. Thank you. And thanks to all of you. Shalom.